After the children have learned informal strategies for multiplication, they move towards the formal strategies in which they use the column to help them to multiply. In year 3, they start this column expanded to show all the steps, and then they quickly move on to compact. And then in year 4, they continue to use compact column multiplication to help them to answer multiplication questions with bigger numbers. Okay, let's look at this first example. We have 34 times 2, so a 2-digit number multiplied by a 1-digit number in year 3. So the first thing we would do is multiply the ones. 4 times 2 is 8. And so we'd put that in the first line here. Then we would multiply the tens and the ones. So 3 tens, or 30, times 2 is 60. And the children can relate their multiplication facts of 3 times 2 to help them with this. So you can see how it's expanded and help them to understand the steps, but also to remind them of the place value. That does not mean 3 ones, this means 3 tens, which is 30. Then once they've multiplied the ones and the tens and the ones, then they combine what they've multiplied back together. So 8 and 60, or 60 and 8, makes 68. Okay, here's another example here. And this time, when we are adding and multiplying the ones together, you'll notice there's a slight change because the ones become more than 10. So it's looking at where we place those in the column. So we multiply the ones, 4 times 3, and we know that that is 12. So you can see I'm putting 1 10 over here, so the columns all line up, and 2 ones. Then I multiply the tens and the ones, so I've got 2 tens, 20 times 3, again using my related multiplication facts to help me. So that is 60. Then I would combine that together. So I know that I've got 2 ones and I've got 7 tens. So my answer is 72. Looking at the next multiplication equation, we've got 25 times 4. And this time you can see I've added an extra column in because one of the answers, when we do each stage of multiplying, will have a 100 in it. So just working through step by step all the different the progress that the children need to be able to manage and to get used to when they're multiplying. So this time we have 5 times 4, so we're multiplying the ones. So 5 times 4 makes 20. Then we are multiplying the tens and the ones, 2 tens times 4, so that's 20 times 4, and that makes 80. And so when we combine 20 and 80, we are making 100. Because 2 add 8 makes 10, so we know that 20 and 80 would make 100. So that's why we have that extra column there to show now we no longer, now we have made 100, sorry. And then we have no tens and no ones in there. Okay, the next example we've got here, we will multiply the ones first. 2 times 4 is 8. And then 3 tens times 4, or 30 times 4. That's when children might start to get a little bit confused. They have to use their related facts, and they know that 3 times 4 makes 12, so they would know that 30 times 4 would be 120. So that's why we've got that extra column there, so we can put the hundreds in the correct place. And then we will combine 120 and 8, and that would make 128. Carrying on in the expanded, another example, we have got 4 times 5 ones, and that makes 20. Then we have 3 tens times 5 ones, and that was 30 times 5, and that would make 15 if it was 3 times 5. But if it's 30 times 5, it would make 150, so relating those facts. And then we combine the 20 and the 150 to make 100. The 100 doesn't change because there's no hundreds to add to it. And the 2 and the 5 make 7, so 20 and 50 make 70, and we've combined it to make 170. Again, you can see how constantly the children are needing to relate their facts to everything that they are doing, making those connections. That's why it's really, really important that they learn their number facts in all areas very, very fluently. Another last example now of expanded column. So we have 4 times 6 ones, which is 24. Then we have 30 times 6, which is 180, relating it to those facts, knowing 3 times 6. And now this gets a little bit more complicated. So we can combine the ones. So we've got 4 ones, but you can see here in the tens, we've got 2 tens and 8 tens, which would make 10 tens, which is 100. So this is where the children have to be really careful when they're combining that together. So we would put 0 here and show that we've now made 100 here. So we would place it underneath, and so now we can add the hundreds. It's really, really important that children understand the place value and what the columns mean in order to help them when they're multiplying. So just to go over that, 2 tens and 8 tens makes 10 tens, which is 100. So no longer do we have anything in the tens column, we have 0 as a placeholder. Now we've got 100. So 100 add 100 is 200. So the answer is 204. So hopefully you can see the progression in how the children will be learning multiplication, and also what that looks like in the expanded column, and why it's important for their children to see those steps so they really understand the place value. And so once they have mastered the expanded and understood those steps, then they can apply the same methods and progression, but in the compact way, and I'll just show you that now. Okay, as before, we are going to be multiplying the ones first. So 7 times 4 is 28. Now this time, because we are not doing it expanded and we are doing it in the compact, we put the 8 ones here, and then we regroup the 2 tens and put it in the tens column here. Then we multiply the tens and ones, so 30 times 4, or 3 tens times 4, we know that that is 120. And so I think about my tens first. So in 120, I have 2 tens, but I need to make sure that I add that to my regrouped tens. So 2 tens and 2 tens is 4 tens. Then in 120, there is 100. So I'm going to put that 100 in the hundreds column. So 37 times 4 is 148. Then, just as in year 3, there will be a small step before moving to compact multiplication column. We will do expanded column multiplication. And this is to help children multiply the bigger number of 3 digits and be able to understand all those steps. Okay, so looking at this first multiplication equation, we would start by multiplying the ones. So 3 times 4 is 12. So we put that in the first row. And then we would multiply the tens and the ones. So we've got 20 times 4, which is 80. And then this is the additional step we have in year 4. We do the hundreds times the ones. So 100 times 4 is 400. Once we multiplied all the ones, tens and hundreds, then we would combine them. So we would work out this. 400, and we're adding the tens, 92. Here's another example, another multiplication equation. So we would multiply the ones. 3 times 4 is 12. Then we multiply the tens and the ones. So 60 times 4. If we know 6 times 4 is 24, then 60 times 4 is 240. So making sure the children are lining up in the columns correctly, with the ones, the tens and the hundreds. So you can see how that differs to this example. We now have, when we've multiplied, we've made a number with hundreds in it. And then we would multiply the hundreds and the ones. So 100 times 4 is 400. Then we would combine them by adding 2 ones, 5 tens and 6 hundreds. This time in this example, we start as we always do, multiplying the ones. It will be 12. Then we are multiplying the tens and the ones. So 60 times 4 is 240. And then we would multiply the hundreds and the ones. So 2 hundreds times 4 is 800. And then the combination is where it becomes a little bit more tricky now, and that's why we've got this extra column here, is because we're going to be making 1,000. So we've got 2 ones, we have got 5 tens, and this time we've got 2 tens, 200, and 800s, and that becomes 1,000. So that is why we need to put a 1 in the thousands column, and then the 0 there, to show that we have no tens, and the 0 is that placeholder. So once they've mastered the expanded column multiplication, then they would move on to the compact column multiplication, which we can sometimes call short multiplication, just like they did in year 3. So that's when basically they don't have, each row doesn't show the steps, but they're still following that same order. So if we look at this first multiplication equation, we are multiplying the ones, 3 times 4, which is 12. So we need to regroup the tens, so we put them underneath there. And then we would do, we would multiply the tens and the ones. So we've got 20 times 4, which is 80. But we can see that we have to add the regrouped 10, so that would become 90. And then we have got 100 times 4, which is 400. Okay, the next equation example, we've got 2 times 4, which is 8. And then we've got 50 times 4, which is 200. So as we've got we've made 200s now, they can't remain in the tens column. So we're going to regroup the 200s and put it into the hundreds column. And then we've got 100 times 4, which is 400, plus the 200s is 600, so 608. Next, we are doing 153 times 4, so 3 times 4 is 12. So we have to regroup the 10, put it underneath. And then we have 50 times 4, which is 200. So we have to put the 200s regrouped there, but then we've got that 10 that we need to add to that column. So it's what, 10 into the tens. And then we times the 100 and the 1. So 100 times 4 is 400, plus the 200s is 600. Lastly, here's an example where one of the steps makes 1,000, just to show you, again, the progression that the children will be practicing and multiplying. So we multiply the ones, 3 times 4 is 12, so we regroup the 1 at 10. And then we've got 50 times 4, which is 200, but we need to make sure that we add in the 10 that's there from the regrouping, and then we put the 2 underneath to show the 200. And then we've got 200s times 4, which is 800s. And then you can see that then we would have 800s, add the 200s, which would make 1,000. So we need to regroup that 1,000, so there'll be 0 hundreds, regroup the thousands into that column. So 253 times 4 will be 1,012.